This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, this is um, a workshop in the rulemaking proceeding, case number 23-2220-RULE. My name is Riley Allen. I'm a commissioner with the the Public Utility Commission, and with me from the commission are Jacob Davis and Tom Nauer. We also have some consultants that are uh, part of our team that are online, and I don't know if they'll be active or not. It's up to them, but EFG is providing limited assistance and helping us to kind of become familiar with the model that we've kind of embarked on relying on. And then we have Opinion Dynamics that is providing other assistance to us in terms of measure characterization in this investigation, but they're also helping out with the changes to the modeling effort that will largely, ideally make the model easier to use, a little more transparent, functional, and accessible. So with that, there were some comments that were provided online. Very much appreciate the comments that were provided. I thought I might just start by giving those that provided comments a chance for kind of a high level summary of their comments to the group or anything they want to call out. I mean, the comments are available. I've reviewed the comments. They're very helpful, I think. And I think the first order of business is just to give folks a chance to articulate what they've tried to present in writing. I will have some questions for folks, but I think that's kind of a logical first step. Um, so with that, I think what I'll do is just start with the Department of Public Service and see if they have any opening comments. It's either TJ Poor or maybe Alec Azek.
So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Couldn't get myself off mute for a minute there. Okay, good. Um, so yeah, I think generally in responses to the questions that you posted, I think uh, generally speaking, I think we covered a lot of this sort of in our initial presentation, so I don't want to repeat myself too much.
Right.
But I think we clearly support the use of the TER model from EFG. As we gave a detailed presentation on, we plan to use it for our own internal analysis as a follow-on from the MD5 study. So very much on aligned there. I think the business as usual case that we outlined as part of our presentation. I think we continue to advocate that for sort of the baseline assumption, which takes into account existing EU programs, tier 3 programs, et cetera. So again, aligned there. And I think, we've seen a lot of comments on sort of the remaining questions around sensitivities and, how to account for market influences and things like that. And so, again, we've articulated our positions on how we plan to build those into our model, but, would very much like to open up the floor to others who commented. A lot of good comments came in. So.
And just so I'm clear, when you refer to market influences, which market influences are you referring to just now?
So, I think we mentioned things like the dynamics of interactive effects of fuel blends on reducing CI scores, or I don't know. I guess I'm thinking of things like the weighting of installed measures against total GHG reductions from liquid fuel sales, those kinds of things. So.
Okay. Good. Yeah, thanks, Alec. Well, just opening it up for any questions people might have. Yeah, your comments were filed, probably 10 or 12 days ago, and appreciated your comments probably around the 24th or 25th. I didn't see any subsequent comments, but I do feel like you've responded to essentially the questions that I have posed pretty well in your opening comments. Any questions for the department at this time? Okay. One of the next, I'll just say that Vermont Gas has provided some comments. Efficiency Vermont provided 2 rounds of comments. In fact, both Vermont Gas and Efficiency Vermont have already provided 2 rounds of comments, and Tom Weiss has also provided comments along with Ken Jones. I'll just turn it over to Efficiency Vermont if David is available. David Westman, are you on?
I'm here, Riley.
Okay. Any opening comments, David?
Nope. I think that for everyone's awareness, our perspective in this proceeding has been to identify what the current programs are. We generally categorize the current programs as the efficiency utility programs, the distribution utility tier 3 programs, and the weatherization assistance programs. Those are all really the baseline, business as usual, you might even call it, for what would happen without the clean heat standard. Nonetheless, they are implicated in the clean heat standard, and so a lot of our comments are really focused around separating out the cost of what the incremental clean heat effort should be, rather than trying to put an overall cost to all programs combined. I just think that's really important for the context of this report. Candidly, for everyone's awareness, I mean, it's in our comments, but for the purpose of this workshop, the economic impact of passing the clean heat standard is whatever incremental costs are passed on in order to achieve those higher goals of the clean heat standard. I don't believe that the intent of the legislature was to think about the clean heat standard in the context of the total cost to achieve all thermal savings. The existing programs are sort of a known entity, and that's really the basis for, I would say, the majority of our comments.
And just so I'm clear, David, are you suggesting that any of the studies that have been done today have not essentially called out the increment, that they've actually kind of looked at the total cost rather than the increment of costs above existing programs?
I'm happy to be told that I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that the costs that we have seen to date include all costs of existing programs plus whatever else.
Okay, thanks. So with that, I think, Jared, you provided quite extensive comments. Maybe you can start by explaining which hat you're wearing as you provided those comments, and provide any summary comments, if you will.
Thank you, Commissioner Allen. Yeah, I do not want to take everyone's time to go through all of my comments, but hope many folks were able to review them. I think the most important thing that I want to say, and for the record, I'm speaking in my capacity as an appointed member of the Vermont Climate Council, appointed to the council to provide expertise in energy and data analysis, and I chair the Science and Data Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. So these are comments in my capacity as an individual counselor. My starting point was what, as was for you, Commissioner Allen, and the PUC, and is reviewing what Act 18 requests when it comes to the economic analysis that we're discussing. And I italicized a couple of parts that I thought were really important within Section 6I. And it says, when we're talking about the estimates of the impact of the Clean Heat Standard, to model, it says, including impacts to customer rates and fuel bills for participating and non-participating customers, net impacts on total spending on energy for thermal sector end uses, and it goes on. But the reason I highlight that is that I think that to date, much of the conversation about the economic impacts has been very narrowly focused on the impact on non-participants and the impact on fossil fuels. But we have not looked in a balanced, comprehensive way at the impacts to participants, those Vermonters who would benefit from the expected incentives and cost saving opportunities that the Clean Heat Standard would increase investment around. And we have also not looked at the effects on those, not on the fossil fuel side. What is the expected decrease in the price of biodiesel, renewable propane, the expected decrease in the cost of weatherization, heat pump water heaters, heat pumps, advanced wood heating systems, all of the eligible measures that are laid out. So I think the most important overall comment I want to share is the legislation, Act 18, calls for a holistic economic analysis that is looking at both participating and non-participating customers and impacts on fuel bills, not just fossil fuels, but recognizing that about 30% of residential, commercial, and industrial fuel use in Vermont is not fossil fuels right now. It is wood, it is some biofuels, it is electricity. So I think it's also very important that we look at potential decreases on the cleaner side, as we've seen in other similar programs around the country, notably the Clean Fuel Standard in Oregon, but that we also look at, not just one part of one side of an equation, but the full equation, including costs and benefits or costs and savings, and then what that means to Vermont's overall heating bill and the possibility to achieve net savings for folks over time, recognizing that many of the clean heat measures help folks move away from high cost, price volatile fossil fuels that are much more expensive over time than some of the more efficient alternatives that are outlined. So I'll pause there because that's quite a bit already. But I think that's the most important thing, is that we have comprehensive, balanced analysis that is looking at all parts of the equation and the net impacts as well, across all fuels and across participating and non-participating customers, not just fossil fuels and not just non-participating customers.
Thanks, Jared. I have a number of questions for you that I want to come back to after others have gone. But I made reference to some comments that you had made in your kind of original presentation, and also I think Vermont Gas had, and maybe others. But it was really, related to what I think of as market efficiencies or dynamic efficiencies that might materialize from essentially more of a market-based rather than an administrative-based approach. I was hoping either you or Vermont Gas could do a better job than I did of kind of articulating what it is that is intended when you kind of raise the prospect of those kind of unfolding. And and I'll come back with you later on how we can potentially remedy that omission. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Can you speak to that now, or do you want to hold off to later? Yeah, I was just, this is just one question I had for you right now, because I know I'm going to ask Tom Weiss to provide comment if he's online, and I want him to benefit from hearing you. I don't see him on, so it may be he'll have to benefit from the recording of you talking to it.
I'm happy to speak to that at whatever point you think is best,
Yeah.
Commissioner.
Yeah,
Mr. Weiss is
right now
often on the
it's fine.
telephone.
And this is Thomas Weiss. I'm on the telephone
Oh, good. Okay, thank you.
for whenever you want to put me on, but just
Yeah,
letting you.
I'll call on you in a minute, but I wanted to call on you after you had the benefit of listening to Jared. Go ahead, Jared.
Okay, so I'll address. So the other portion of my comments and suggestions related to making sure that as we do economic analysis, that because the Public Utility Commission has pointed to the possibility of a thermal energy benefits charge instead of a clean heat standard, that we should subject alternative proposals to the clean heat standard to the same economic analysis. And just to step back, my perspective as a member of the Climate Council, given the legal charge we were given in the Global Warming Solutions Act to make recommendations, is that it is important to do at least two things simultaneously, not just meet our emissions reduction obligations, but to do so as cost effectively and equitably as possible. And so to me, that means that when we're looking at climate pollution reduction opportunities, we want to do that at the lowest cost per ton possible. And that there's a supply and demand element there. And the more that we open up the opportunity to identify, uncover, and deliver pollution reducing opportunities in the thermal sector, the more that higher supply of activity and opportunity can serve to bring down the cost and the marginal cost of those emissions reducing activities. My concern is that if we don't have an open, dynamic market to provide those activities, and like in the context of a thermal energy benefits charge, my assumption, and I want to say that I am very curious to learn more about that proposal, to hear more about the thinking from the PUC. I know that it's not fully fleshed out yet, and I could certainly be missing pieces of what is intended or proposed. But my assumption has been that in a thermal energy benefits charge approach, that would be the public sector collecting revenue from obligated parties, from fossil fuel importers, and then using that money to invest in existing or to provide more revenue to expand existing or create new public programs to reduce emissions. And my concern is that if we have to funnel all of the activity through existing or new programs, it's going to constrain the supply of potential clean heat activity that could happen in a more open and dynamic market as envisioned under the clean heat standard. I think that we want to provide not just the negative disincentive that a thermal energy benefits charge would create, a fee or a charge on fossil fuels, but the positive incentive in the form of a value of clean heat credits to reward the activity that's helping customers reduce climate pollution, and often do so by reducing their own bills. If we don't have the value of clean heat credits, there's less of a clear and direct positive incentive for private market actors to serve Vermonters with that activity. So that's some of my initial thinking. I'd love to hear from others on it as well, but I think generally we want to ensure that we can achieve pollution reductions at the lowest cost per ton and have as many entities involved in that activity as possible in the interests of market efficiency, rather than trying to funnel all activity through public sector programs.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Jared, and I apologize for not giving you a heads up that I was going to be putting you on the spot. I think your comments kind of naturally flow into Vermont Gas as kind of the next commenter. So I'll turn to them for any comments they have, preliminary comments that they have.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Allen, and thanks, Jared, for explaining sort of the market background. I think we agree pretty strongly with what Jared described in terms of the value of a market-based solution. It's specifically because we can't know the future that we need a solution that allows the space to innovate over time, because we know that companies will make investments. VGS has suggested some of its own, and those are things that we think about. We think about updating on a regular basis. There's a universe of solutions that exist today, and potentially a different universe that exists tomorrow. And the state has experience with administrative programs, so we sort of know how those work, how efficient those are in distributing the money that's been collected back to ratepayers and as incentives. So we should think very carefully about which of those solutions we want, considering that we know so much about one of them, and it's potentially more stifling to the sort of innovative environment. We also think it's pretty important to derive a least cost solution. We mentioned that in our comments, and we think a market-based solution does that. We suggested a couple of ways that you can model that, but specifically that we don't try to achieve other policy goals within this policy. It's not that those other goals aren't noble, it's just that they're not within the letter of the law here. And if we care about reducing carbon, we need to do that in the most efficient, economically efficient way possible in order to keep the program cost as low as possible. The other things we hit on in our comments were mostly suggestions of things to include, in particular avoided methane. There's been a lot of discussion about whether to include or how to include avoided methane in biofuels. At the TAG over the last several meetings, 6 or 8 weeks, we suggested some ways that could be included in a fairly, we think, a fairly efficient modeling way to just sort of get the guardrails of what avoided methane means to costs and deployment among the range of biofuels that might be available to deploy. So I'll keep my comments there brief, but I'm happy to
Appreciate
answer
it.
any
Yeah,
questions.
thanks. I'm going to turn to Ken Jones next because he provided comments on November 5th. And then I think I'll close with Tom Weiss afterwards. He provided some comments yesterday.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on Dave Westman's comments about the consideration of an analysis that's looking at incremental action. And I agree that the NV5 and opinion dynamics analysis did not do that. They looked at the sum total of all actions that are necessary to accomplish the greenhouse gas reduction. But the Energy Futures Group effort and their team that led to the Climate Council's work did build on an incremental, but unfortunately, they built incrementally on a business as usual scenario, and that business as usual scenario may have included actions like the clean heat standard. In other words, the point, and I think people are in agreement that the business as usual scenario led to a conclusion that we don't need much action I don't think we needed any action to hit 2024 target or 2025 target, and very little to hit the 2030 target. And I think that was just kind of a misrepresentation of business as usual. I think there were assumptions there as what business as usual would accomplish. But there's a problem with just thinking about incremental, and that's the legislation. I appreciate the legislation a great deal, and I want to see the clean heat standard move forward. But the clean heat standard is not an incremental program. It is designed and defines credits to include the work of Tier 3, to include the creditable activity that Efficiency Vermont has helped sponsor, and to include the creditable activity of the Weatherization Assistance Program. So it makes the analysis hard. And this leads to what I was suggesting, and I know it's a bit of a leap. There's a lot of other factors that led to my suggestion. But one of the pieces is we can't take the cost to generate an incremental credit and assign the credit cost to that, because there are so many credits that do not require any clean heat standard based payment. Certainly the early action credits, to my knowledge, and I've asked many people, the people that have done work in 2023 and 2024, I don't know of anyone that had an expectation that they would be paid a clean heat credit. They made their decision based upon the economic environment at the time, and including incentive payments, sometimes through Efficiency Vermont and sometimes through Tier 3. And the weatherization program, has been established for several years and has its payment structure. And those creditable activities took place. They don't need a credit payment. And in fact, by giving them a credit payment, and I project that into the future, I want those programs to continue to provide the pacing of additional heat pump installations, additional weatherization, without the need of the clean heat credit. And therefore, because if we provide that payment to all of those activities, it is this economic concept of a free rider, and it is millions of dollars. It leads to the conclusion that others have about the cost of a program and therefore the cost of a clean heat credit. So that's a fundamental starting point. And what I suggested is to, maybe this is going backwards, I don't know, but it is to establish a credit value and establish the retirement schedule. And I think we should start in a fairly conservative fashion, because that then establishes a very specific dollar amount that's available to the default delivery agent, recognizing that there's an additional part of the market, which is providing low carbon liquid biofuels. But still, you get a starting point there, and we can make some projection as to the partition of how many of the credits will be pursued with installed measures, how many of the credits would be installed with delivered measures. But it gives us that starting point to allow the market to start. Speculating as to how the market is going to move forward is very difficult. And I think the PUC acknowledged that in their status report, that it is very difficult to initiate the market in the strategy of, okay, we'll have a default delivery agent come up with a budget and translate that budget into a credit value. That's really hard. And the timing makes it unworkable to actually have 2026 be an initial obligation year. So again, my proposal is to use a specific credit amount, the retirement credit amount, with specific credit value based upon some existing markets that do exist, largely the California low carbon fuel standard market. And granted, it's the transportation fuel, but it's still this transportation, it's still the fossil diesel compared to renewable diesel and biodiesel. But anyway, that gives you a credit price. We can see how that credit price works in terms of how it leads to the purchase of the purchase and sale of renewable biofuels, and use our existing installed measures as a credit base to provide some revenue for the default delivery agent. So it's a very different model than trying to add up the total costs and distribute the total costs to those that are buying fossil fuels. And as my submission points out, it comes up with some fairly conservative retirement schedule. It comes up with a very small amount, a very small impact on fossil fuel heating oil prices, propane prices, and natural gas prices, which in today's climate, I think, is a necessary starting point to move the clean heat standard forward. Any of the values that people translate from the NV5 work are very, very large. And to be honest, it makes it a non-starter. It's just not going to be able to go forth. And I'm very concerned that the sort of changing some of the assumptions, but still using this basic approach of how much does it cost to implement a clean heat measure, and therefore that should be the cost of a credit, will lead us to very high impacts on heating fuel. So that's why I put my suggestion forward. And thanks for letting me explain that a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, I think, yeah, I'll come back to that. TJ4 had a comment or a question somewhere along the line. I don't know if he still has one or not, but he's taking his hand down.
Yeah, I wasn't sure of the timing of that. I think it probably is better just to let Mr. Weiss go. I probably have
Okay.
several questions for everybody, really. So,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay. Let's go to Mr. Weiss, and then we'll come back and put TJ on. Mr. Weiss.
Hello, this is Thomas Weiss. Thank you for the opportunity. I actually submitted 2 sets of comments. One was on October 24th, some in regard to the check back report and some in regard to some details for a model, and then the comments I submitted yesterday.
Thanks for calling that out.
You started out talking about the thermal energy report model. The closest thing that I have seen to a model so far are the appendices to the NV5 report. I've seen reports, the thermal energy report and the opinion dynamics report, but I consider the model to be the workings. So I don't know what the workings of the models are or how they're set up, so I can offer no opinion on which model to use as the basis. I have gotten a hold of some of the details of the model, the LEAP model that I believe went into the thermal energy report, but I've not had time to review them yet. So my comments have mostly been on components of what goes into the formulas used in the model to determine the results. I'm a civil engineer, and that's part of my background is working on models and developing the equations to come out with the results. So most of my comments in those 2 letters have to do with what actually goes into the models to make it work. And what I've done is to take the appendices, which were basically tables from the NV5 report, and turned them into a working model so I can put in various inputs and come up with results. One of the things that I found during that work has to do with a thermal energy benefits charge is what it's being called. And that the NV5 report, I acknowledge, did not claim to be the plan. It just claimed to be one way that they came up with that could meet the requirements for the clean heat standard and the emissions reductions. But one of the things that I did in my modeling was I didn't just look at reductions. I looked at how much fuel would be used of each type in each year. And what I found out was we wouldn't be using fossil fuels at all after 2030 based on the modeling assumptions in that model. So if that's the case, then a thermal energy benefit charge would basically raise no money after the year 2030. I do not expect that to be realistic, but that's a check that should go into the model, is not just what are the reductions, but how much energy, fuel, and electricity of each type would be used in each year. And with that, I'll end my comments.
Riley, you're on mute.
Yeah, I was going to just call on TJ now that we've given folks a chance to provide high-level comments based upon their presentations or what they've shared with us so far. So TJ, do you want to tee something up?
Yeah, I just thank you. So generally, I think folks started talking about how we should be looking at the cost of incremental actions. I think we completely agree. Need to really potentially update a business as usual or have a couple of scenarios as our one of our original filings said of like what the what we think is going to happen by 2030. I do want to note that the business as usual forecast that's kind of embedded, it's a couple of years old now, but that was embedded in the model that we're going forward with, was really vetted through the Climate Council, really thoroughly. There was several meetings where the public and stakeholders had chances to discuss that. So I don't want to just kind of, I'm sorry, Ken, I can't let that comment just lie, that I kind of defending that process a little bit a couple of years ago, that there was a lot of input into that. And it was, one reasonable business as usual forecast, in which it kind of speaks to the potential to have perhaps two or different levels of business as usuals going forward to understand how far we have to go to get to our targets. I guess I wanted to ask, I have a couple of questions for a couple of different entities, but I didn't understand something that I guess.
Hey, TJ, I saw Ken raise his hand as you were kind of calling him out a little bit. Maybe it's
Sure.
up to you whether to let
I
him
can stop,
respond now or to come back to that later. Ken, you want to go?
Now is probably good. Yeah.
Yeah. The business as usual scenarios were reviewed, but quite a few of the comments were not accepted. And my understanding of the business as usual scenario that was ultimately used included an inappropriate baseline. It's the bottom line of that business as usual scenario, which suggested that we were going to hit our 2025 targets without any additional action. Well, that's kind of evidence that it missed something. But again, a lot of it was its starting points. It used a different set of data with regards to fossil fuel use. So there were comments, but a lot of them were not incorporated. So, but again, I want to get to that bottom line. That business as usual scenario isn't a very good representation of what's happening right now, and therefore it suggests very little requirement for, in our case, credit formation, and that's just not going to work. So that was my point.
Okay,
yeah, so fair enough. I mean, what I is saying is went through a vetting process, and that not everything that anybody says is going to get incorporated. But I think it was a reasonable outcome, and I don't know how you can say that we actually haven't met the targets when the year hasn't been finished yet for 2024. So that's presumptuous. That's we will see. And I actually am of the opinion that we're probably pretty close to the 2024 targets, but we'll see. I could be wrong. My point is that I was kind of defending the honor of that other process, but also saying, hey, maybe there's a need to have a couple of different, in the modeling going forward, a couple of different baselines from which we're going off of for, if as a toggle or a variable that we look at going forward to inform the range of potential costs of a clean heat standard. And so I think that leaves room for, whether it, I mean, the BAU needs to be updated anyway, but if multiple sets of potential futures to be analyzed, and that might give us a little more confidence in the range of outputs.
Thanks, TJ. Why don't you continue on?
Yeah, so I guess the first question I had is, Jared, you said that the market effects would reduce the cost of weatherization. And I could see it could reduce the cost of weatherization to a participant, right? Because the weatherization, they're getting incentives, but I don't understand how it reduces the total cost. And so maybe if you could clarify that.
Yeah, no, that's a good clarification, and I agree with that distinction. Is that the way that I think about the intended design of the clean heat standard, and this is based on existing models elsewhere, including the clean fuel standard in Oregon, which is very similar, just focused on transportation fuels rather than heating fuels, is that in essence it's a revenue neutral program. Any upward any cost of compliance for the program is going towards the activity to deliver clean heat measures that reduce emissions. And in a scenario in which there's enough clean heat activity to meet the emissions reduction requirements, the cost of a clean heat credit would be zero. If there's a gap between the emissions reduction targets and the amount of clean heat activity that is happening, whether that's weatherization, heat pumps, installed measures, delivered cleaner fuel measures, etc. If there's a gap, then the design of the market-based program, as I understand it, is that obligated parties will need to provide incentives which will lower the cost of clean heat measures for participating customers, for those that choose to take advantage of the incentivized activity to do clean heat measures that reduce emissions. So I think my concern is that we're only looking at the side of the equation of the effect on non-participants and on fossil fuels rather than the lower consumer costs that will likely be delivered as a result of that other side of the equation to reduce the cost of undertaking clean heat measures. Because if you're not incentivizing them by lowering the cost of eligible fuels or installations, then why would there be a cost on the other side of the equation?
So I think that's helpful. So just to be clear, I agree with you that, and I think the model allows for this, that participants and non-participants should be looked at. But I think you have to, there's still the cost of the measure, right? And one set of entities or people pay for that, and then one person benefits from it. And if you're spreading out one weatherization, for example, like everybody who funds however it's funded pays for it, and then the participant gets the benefit. And so there's still the cost, though. The cost is still there for Vermonters as a whole.
Right, and this is another. I mean, I think a simple way that has been modeled that I don't agree with is to say that the entire cost of that measure of say a weatherization project, let's just say $12,000 for a comprehensive whole home retrofit. The simplifying assumption, my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, the simplifying assumption that was made in the NV5 analysis is the entire cost, 100% incentives, in order to get any Vermonter to do anything related to clean heat, that has to be fully paid for. And so all of the costs would go to the obligated parties, and they would pass all of that cost onto their fossil fuel customers, rather than a distinction between program costs and the customer economics. Because what we see, I mean, for Vermont households with lower income, for the weatherization assistance program, of course you need to assume 100% incentive. That activity is already happening. But for market rate, whether it's weatherization, whether it's heat pump installations, I don't think that every bit of clean heat activity, over the coming years is going to need to be fully paid for. One of the reasons by the clean heat program, one of the reasons is that, these pieces of equipment are coming to the end of their lifespan every year. And if say somebody's water heater dies, they're not expecting the government or an obligated party or anybody else to replace their water heater for free for them. I can see modeling the marginal cost of the difference between a heat pump water heater versus the type of water heater they would replace it with. But this assumption around 100% of a measure of an installed measure cost being a program cost, I don't think that's reasonable, necessary, or expected.
Right. So I think I agree with you there, right? So I think we need to distinguish between societal costs and benefits and program costs and benefits, right? And so in a societal cost and benefit, you would include the entire retrofit cost or the incremental cost in a market opportunity that you're talking about, right? Like when at the end of life, you replace it, the incremental cost to the clean measure, 100% of that incremental cost is a societal cost. And that the program cost is a portion of that. And it could be 100% like low income weatherization programs, and it could be 50%. And so, so I feel like I don't think I disagreed with anything you said. So maybe we're on the same page there.
And I thought your distinction at the beginning was a good one, that the incentive, that the clean heat standard wouldn't necessarily lower the cost of a weatherization project, but it could potentially lower the customer cost of accessing weatherization by the presence of clean heat credits and the incentives that they represent.
Right. And so that comes, I think, full circle back to something we presented at the last workshop in terms of one of the variables to be modeled is the incentive level that is necessary to achieve the penetration of the measures. And I think this is, if I recall correctly, Efficiency Vermont mentioned kind of what the current incentive levels are for weatherization as an example in your comments. And Dave, you can correct me if I mischaracterize anything here, but I think it was 100%, as you said, Jared, for low income weatherization, and we would need more of that. There's moderate income was around 75%, and then market rate was at 45% perhaps in the last model. And I think that's going to be a key one of like that market rate incentive level. Like, what are we assuming we need to pay to get to our goals? And this is under kind of the modeling structure that we've been talking about. Ken, I probably have questions for you as well about the other structure, but and so it might be useful to talk a little bit about what the range of that incentive level maybe should be. We're at, if my understanding is, we're actually even for moderate income, we're higher than 75% right now, and we're having trouble getting people to do it, whether that's workforce or people wanting to actually make the investment with the other 10% that they need to invest, and that the market rate also needs to be higher, and especially to get to the levels that we need to reach. And so where that range is on all measures, on all installed measures, is going to be a big variable that really impacts the price, I guess. And so I don't know if it's worth talking about here, Commissioner Allen, if that's something you want to hear later on. Or
I don't know that I have a pressing issue. I do see David Hill's electronic hand kind of jiggling, and I want to give him a chance to speak up while his comments are still relevant to the conversation. So if he can jump in.
Thank you, Riley. I thought it would be helpful to appreciate a lot of the comments and discussion. in the baseline for the thermal energy report, the cost comparisons and the analysis is in comparison to the business as usual, the updated business as usual as we were able to do it. And so it incorporated activities such as the legislature's increase in funding for weatherization and the anticipated federal funds and those types of things. So those are in the business as usual. And I agree with Jared if the comment that the analysis did not try to capture the market dynamics of the cost for the clean heat standard, but rather the costs associated with the incremental measures required to attain compliance. And so the market dynamics, the cost for a clean heat standard credit potentially being zero while there are program costs. If existing activity, as Jared was saying, if existing activity can reach the level required, your clean heat standard credit might have a price of zero. The comment that Mr. Weiss made about the future of as fossil fuel as a revenue base declines based on the reduction of that fuel type, the impacts would become larger and larger. That's a larger structural issue that needs to be addressed potentially over time, but is definitely something that is present. So those are really the two main things that I wanted to identify, that the thermal report, the analysis we've been doing does compare back to a business as usual. And I guess related to the comments that Ken was making, we attempted to do the best that we could in terms of updating the business as usual based on, again, the more recent activities. And those don't necessarily, the costs that then are associated with fuel price impacts are the incremental program and measure costs required for compliance, but not necessarily setting the clean heat standard credit price. If that's, hopefully that's clarifying on that point.
Thanks, David. TJ, if you want to continue on.
Yeah, I guess maybe just one more main question. It relates to kind of the market dynamics, I guess, is it seems like that folks have an assumption that the market dynamics will lower the cost. And I think this is easier to talk about in the biofuels context. I guess I'm not understanding that fully. It may lower the cost relative to the other fuels, but I'm not sure how it lowers the cost. And I think the evidence that I look at, or not evidence really, but the context that I look at, and Greg, I will hope you chime in on this, is that, as Vermont Gas kind of looks to procure more and more renewable natural gas, the costs aren't going down. Some of the first projects were more affordable, if you will, than some of the later newer projects. And so, in that context, if we were, getting the low-hanging fruit of biofuel production at a lower cost, why wouldn't the cost go up? And then overlay onto all of that is that we're a really tiny market, and I could see some scenario where we're, this huge driver of biofuels production that Vermont actually has influence by creating the demand, the supply responds, and the prices go down. I don't see Vermont with that kind of market power in order to do that, to have that kind of influence on what actually seems like kind of a capped market for biofuels. I'll stop there. Hopefully that question kind of made sense, and if folks could give some more
Yeah,
context.
I'm hoping Tristan is poised to respond to it.
Thank you, Commissioner. So, I'll approach this from the perspective of transportation, because this is really where we see a lot of this happening. When you don't have a mandate, you're typically talking about very, very small, practically minuscule volumes being moved into a place like Vermont, right? So maybe there's an individual company that has a decarbonization requirement, and so they bring in those very small volumes. You're typically talking about the most expensive transportation involved, because you're talking about a truck, right? So if it's a gaseous fuel, you could be talking about a virtual pipeline. If it's a liquid fuel, you're literally just talking a tanker truck, and tanker trucks have the highest transportation costs per unit of clean fuel measure that you're bringing in. Once you start to see mandates kick in, the overall volume increases. And even in a state like Vermont, you don't have to talk about, you don't have water access, but barge or anything like that, but even something like rail. Once you have enough demand from a clean heat system to start requiring, you're going to need a train to start bringing those volumes in rather than an individual truck, the transportation costs per unit go down drastically. And so that's where we typically see costs start to go down, is you start to employ less expensive but higher volume transportation systems. And because transportation for a place like Vermont is a huge component of that price, because you don't have the production systems within the state itself, that's where we'd start to see that go into effect. So happy to turn it over to Greg for the second part to that, but I just want to address the transportation costs. That's where we really see a big impact in bringing those overall fuel costs down.
Yeah, I can pick it up from there. I think that it's important to remember that we're talking too about the cost per ton of abatement and not just the cost per molecule or per gallon. So the reference frame on what's cheapest is important there. In biofuels, I think you're right that a lot of the sort of least expensive projects probably got done first. But as the number of compliance entities increases over time, we sort of expect the market to respond to that and make investments. And the economics for a developer are different than the economics for a buyer. So I don't think it's a guarantee that the cost per ton will go up over time. Maybe that's what the market has seen in the past. I'm not certain we could project that into the future. And when you're thinking about the cost per gallon going down because of the compliance payment, I think that probably is temporary, right? And I know Jared brought this up in some of his comments, because what we're talking about there is that the incentive payment that is going to a voluntary buyer to take these fuels over a fossil fuel, because it creates a credit, implies a transfer of value. So that exists for a while, but as the level of renewable fuels in the market rises, probably, I haven't modeled this myself, but probably over something like half the fuel, I'm guessing, that has to shrink, I imagine. So I believe that would have to be temporary, and it may exist for 5 years, it may exist for 15 years. It's not something we've modeled, but it seems that sort of relationship has to exist.
Thanks for that. It looks like TJ is processing. I'll give him a moment to consider whether he wants to kind of weigh in. But it's, there's, from our perspective, there's the question of, essentially, if there's a there, which is what I hear as part of TJ's question. But the second part is, if there is a there, how can we capture that, or recognize that, or document that, or somehow reflect it in either the narrative or the modeling effort that we're trying to see our way forward on to capture the potential market dynamic influences that might be associated with a more market-based approach, like a clean heat standard over thermal energy benefit charge approach, which is I think more analogous to the traditional administrative approaches that we've relied on, an expansion of the traditional approaches that we've relied on in the past. If anybody has an answer, I'd appreciate it, or if anybody is willing to help us work toward an answer after this this meeting, then I'd like to know that.
This is Thomas Weiss. I'm raising my hand. Get into the queue.
You muted, Riley, if you were responding to Thomas.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, Thomas, please go ahead, then Tristan will follow.
Thank you. My concern or point is that I'm hearing people talk about trends. As I understand it, most or all renewable fuels are, or many of them, are based on agricultural crops, which are commodities. And their prices will vary depending on weather and crop yields, and the prices could be quite volatile. So the model, I hope, would have a means of accounting for volatility by, I guess, adjusting to some extent the effects on how the trends are going. That's the end of my comment.
Thank you, Thomas. Tristan?
So certainly using price ranges, I think, is a very valuable approach. There's some excellent data out there that I know has been submitted as part of VGS's comments, whether it's some of the modeling that's been done for renewable fuels like RNG, and the U.S. Department of Energy has some excellent resources showing price ranges. So first, it does address the volatility, but it also is going to help understand, right, as we think about the impacts, bringing in different fuels from different locations, that sort of thing. The second aspect to that is really, and I think this gets to Greg's comment, is carbon intensity is going to vary as well. And so when we think about not just the absolute price, in terms of the energy provided, but also the carbon abatement cost of different technologies, especially different feedstocks. I'll give you the example of RNG. You have some very different carbon intensity scores depending on the feedstock. As a general rule, the RNG becomes more expensive RNA production cost as the carbon intensity goes down. And so your carbon abatement cost is actually improving when you start to employ those lower carbon intensity feedstocks. And so looking at those ranges from both of those perspectives, very valuable from a modeling exercise to make sure you capture those variables that you were referring to, Commissioner.
Go ahead, Greg.
I just wanted to sort of refute one point that Mr. Weiss brought up, that feedstocks for most renewable fuels are not necessarily agriculturally based. Some of them are waste products from agriculture, sure. There are many other waste products that feed in. So I don't think it implies that renewable fuels by their nature are price volatile. In fact, what we've seen in this state is that renewable fuels are generally procured under a long-term contract that have very stable prices. At least that's the type of contracts that VGS has pursued. So there is actually, we see a price stability benefit to our customers by doing these things. Now, of course, there are price levels that we're sensitive to, but the stability is quite strong.
This is Thomas Weiss. My counter to that is my fuel dealer sells biodiesel at the exact same price as sells number 2 diesel heating fuel. So the volatility that's in the heating fuel gets automatically transferred to the biodiesel.
Go ahead, Jared, and then Zach.
I just wanted to go back to one of the things that TJ had said earlier. So if there's other comments that are directly on this thread or point, I'm happy to step back.
Mine's just a quick clarifying question, Jared, actually for Greg, if that's okay. And my camera should be turning on here. Apologize. Greg, I think I may have just not caught everything you said, but I understood the response to Mr. Weiss's comment about why biofuel prices aren't going to necessarily have the level of volatility tied directly to agricultural products. But you then made a comment about alternative fuels providing actually price stability. Can you just repeat what you meant by that point? I'm not sure I caught it.
Yeah, sure. So for us, I mean, we're a regulated utility, remember, so that our contracts get approved through the commission and all of the things that come along with that. So that means we're procuring under long-term procurement agreements. So those generally have fairly stable pricing mechanisms associated with them. Now, Whether all fuel dealers are capable of doing that in the long run, I'm not sure. But having a compliance market certainly lends itself to long-term procurement over short-term spot pricing that Mr. Weiss might experience with his fuel dealer today.
Yep. Thank you. That makes perfect sense.
Jared?
Yeah, so I just wanted to go back to something that TJ said and try to get a little bit more clear, share where I was and see if we're on the same page. I think that there's an important distinction between prices that are experienced at the customer level versus kind of costs at the market or societal level. So TJ, what I heard you say, and please correct me or jump in at any time, was that, well, let me back up. What I was trying to say in terms of the balance of the analysis is that a lot of the analysis that's been done to date has been simplified as the cost of the clean heat standard is the price effect to non-participating customers who use fossil fuels. Like the cost has been simplified as that some potential X cents a gallon increase for fossil fuel customers for whom obligated parties, fossil fuel corporations that import fossil fuel into Vermont, are passing their cost of compliance. They're saying they'll do that. So that's what the modeling is saying, that that's the added cost. I think what I heard you say is that, you know, if we're looking at the cost of biofuels, that Vermont's demand in that market isn't going to actually address that cost. I thought Tristan had an interesting response, and I can see on the clean side how, you know, there could be economies of scale, say through, you know, if there are more contractors or utilities purchasing heat pumps, then maybe that kind of economy of scale or bulk purchasing brings the per unit cost down. And so you actually are seeing a market cost reduction. But if the way that you were talking about biofuels, like is Vermont's demand enough to actually change the underlying cost of biofuels rather than like the price that a customer of those biofuels sees? I think the reverse would also apply, right? Like our demand for fossil fuels is not actually changing the cost of fossil fuels in the global market. It's a global commodity product. So what we're trying to estimate is the consumer, well, there's multiple things that we're trying to do. We're trying to do a program level, we're trying to do a societal level. What I was trying to speak to on the lower prices on the clean side is at the consumer level, that any increase that non-participating clean heat customers who are fossil customers, any cents per gallon increase that they would see, that's going to be directly related to an offsetting lower cost for a participating clean heat customer. And so all I'm saying is that we shouldn't just present one side of that. We should be presenting, from a customer economics point of view, what those customers who decide to keep using fossil fuels would potentially see as a price effect, but also those who say, I'd rather just use a B20 biodiesel blend or a renewable diesel drop-in fuel blend or a renewable propane, or I want to weatherize, or I want to do any of these measures. If we agree that there's going to be possible upward price pressure on the fossil side, then we also need to agree that there's going to be downward pressure on the clean side, because that's what that's going towards. And so, you know, I do think that there's separate and also important questions in terms of the modeling at a societal or a program level. But from that customer economics perspective, like there's not some extra amount that that an increase on one side correlates to a decrease on the other side, and we need to show both of those, I think, to be.
I think you're, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Commissioner.
Well, just that, you know, I am expecting, Jared, for us to be, you know, the outputs of the model is what I interpret you to be kind of speaking to. So are we kind of, you know, when you know, we present the narrative that shows the impacts, we are recognizing both essentially the downside and the upside, and maybe at different from different perspectives, participant level, or maybe administrator level, or maybe societal level, but we are showing essentially a complete portfolio of outputs that represent all of the influences that you're speaking to. And I think your points are well made and well taken, and I think that's something that we'll endeavor to kind of try to address as we kind of find our way forward. TJ?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's worth, if it's just me that still wants to clarify that a little more, what
Go
Jared
ahead,
was
TJ. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm just going to give example numbers here off the top of my head, which is dangerous. So if fossil fuels, fuel oil costs $3 a gallon, and a biofuels cost $3.50 a gallon, which, and I understand that fluctuates. It might be on par, whatever, but let's say it costs $3.50 a gallon. So the obligated entity needs to cover that difference, 50 cents a gallon, and is going to pass that through to customers, or at least they're saying they're going to. And so I don't see where the discount comes in for the customer, even the participant who gets it. Maybe they just are getting biofuels at the same price as the fossil fuel. Why would they? And I'm missing how they actually pay less, because there's just more money collected, and it's kind of the same, assuming it's the same BTU content, right? It's the same fuel. I don't know where they really pay less.
The way that I think about it is that the paying less is represented by the value of the clean heat credit. And the example that I look to is Oregon's Clean Fuel Program, and they monitored the price effects on multiple fuels. And so they shared this example of, the price effect of their clean fuel program was 5 to 6 cents a gallon per gallon of diesel or gasoline in 2021. But the value of those clean fuel credits brought down the price of biodiesel from used cooking oil by $1.16 a gallon, from biodiesel made from soybeans by 61 cents a gallon. They talked about the decrease in cost of installing EV charging infrastructure, and downward rate pressure for electricity. And so that's the basis for which is the evidence of other market-based programs and the price effects in opposite directions, depending on what's more or less polluting, and the value of those credits represented in the tons of emissions. And I think you look at something like that, and it's like, wow, how can a 5 to 6 cents a gallon price on the fossil side cover $1.16 or a 60-cent decrease on the cleaner side? And I think the difference is the volumes, right? When you're starting at a really large amount of supply on the dirty side, on the fuel side, then a relatively small amount of cents per gallon can significantly drop the price of a much lower total volume of sales on the cleaner side. That's what my understanding is we saw in Oregon, and I think is intended, and we would expect to see here. And this just goes back to my concern, is that the modeling to date has only shown one side of that price effect analysis, not the full picture. And I think that we need to show the full picture.
Well, this is why I'm asking questions about it, because I don't think any analysis has really dove into kind of the market impacts, for lack of a better term, of kind of the broader market impacts of this. And I think that I feel like I am full circle in thinking, hey, well, Vermont isn't big enough like Oregon or next to California that is like a quarter of all renewable diesel in the US, or in like to have that kind of impact in the market. But I'm going to stop now. There's others at the department that have looked into that comparison at Oregon more than I have too. So I don't know. It's worth continuing to go, but I think that's just the crux of it. Is I don't know that we're big enough to really drive those market effects in what's like a national market. And there are other markets for the fuels that will really drive the price. It's like Vermont doesn't set the rec price for renewable energy credits, right? It's all based off of Massachusetts, because you have a choice of, I'm going to sell this renewable energy there or here. And so
I guess I would just clarify again that I don't expect that Vermont's demand for any type of biofuel or clean heat measure is going to change the overall market price that would occur nationally or internationally. But I do expect that it would put downward price pressure on the prices that Vermont consumers pay, because of the value in the presence of clean heat credits and the need to get and retire them, and the need to incentivize that activity when there's any gap between the desired amount of activity to reduce pollution and what's going to happen naturally in the market.
Okay,
Thanks.
I feel like the clean heat credits are the cost, not the benefit. So I guess
I think they represent.
I'll stop.
Okay. Well, I mean, what I'm hearing, and I heard it from Tristan, and I heard it from Jared, that kind of these upstream scale effects are trivial, but the local scale effects could be quite material. But these are, if these are essentially the market dynamic effects that you're referring to, essentially local scale effects, that's one potential category of what I think of as market dynamic efficiencies that can potentially materialize. But that's the one that I hear as being kind of clearly called out, and that's something now that's called out that we might be able to kind of see if we can either borrow from Oregon or find other ways to kind of reflect it in the modeling, or potentially in the narrative in some way. So thanks for that. Anybody else have comments? I see other folks have come and gone as we've been having this conversation. Welcome, Matt. Nice to see you here. I mean, this conversation has been great. I really appreciate TJ kind of going through his questions, because it's helped me to check off the questions that I had, and I didn't have to do it by just kind of walking through each one of those questions. But one question that I do have, and I think this is most pointedly focused at Vermont Gas, is addressing the concern of whether essentially we can achieve scale in kind of biofuels or renewable natural gas, relatively quickly. I mean, there is a concern, and I think you've addressed it in your comments in part, that there is kind of this potential regional reservoir of clean fuels that might be available. I'm sticking in my mind it's like 540 billion BTUs or something to that effect. But I'd like to have as much comfort as I can and document it as well as I can. The availability of the the liquid fuels and clean liquid fuels that might be relied on in a clean heat standard or even a thermal energy benefit charge framework. Can anyone help me?
I'll start since those were our comments. I think you quoted the number accurately from what we showed. There's a number of studies, we cited them, ICF, the updated billion ton study that show sort of volumes of RNG, recognizing that that's a gaseous fuel, available from the sort of regional area. And we limited that to sort of the eastern Canadian provinces and northeast, sort of east of maybe Chicago area and north of, I don't know, Pennsylvania-ish, for procurement areas. And we didn't include the rest of the country that might be available under more of a book and claim type system. And there's plenty of volume there. It's sort of maybe the opposite of DJ's point earlier. We're such a small market in Vermont that we don't need much regional supply to meet our demands here for a fairly small population. So the studies, like I said, we cited, we're happy to provide more or talk about those at another time. I don't need to go through theirs. I do just want to point out, you asked about liquid biofuels. That's not my expertise. Maybe Matt would weigh in on that for me.
Any comments, Matt? Apparently not.
That's a really difficult to answer, particularly because much of our biodiesel, renewable diesel policy, while there are state programs driven, there's no question that the low carbon fuel standard in California has driven production of renewable diesel in mostly Louisiana to move those gallons to California. But much of these policies really depend on federal policy, and that may take a turn after Tuesday. So for me to predict anything about supply based on the ramping up of renewable diesel refineries based on federal energy policies I feel not qualified.
Okay, thanks. So switching gears, I'm going to try to put Dave Westman on the spot if he's still here. Concerns the workforce availability in the comments that Efficiency Vermont provided. Efficiency Vermont basically, to summarize, pointed out that labor force availability for weatherization and efficiency efforts are a real concern, and that these need to be somehow folded into the modeling exercise. I'm certainly sympathetic and interested in the concern, and I'm trying to figure out if there's any kind of concrete or actionable way to kind of incorporate that concern into the modeling.
Thanks, Commissioner Allen. Dave Westman had to hop off a little bit early, so I'll be answering on behalf of Efficiency Vermont.
Okay.
Right now, I think our thought process, and I think generally happy to reiterate that the importance of the constraints of workforce currently and in the future for this work, specifically for installed measures. In our comments, we had some really high-level recommendations, and that's where our thinking is right now, and we can follow up if we have any more detailed suggestions. But just to reiterate some of what we suggested, we did cite the department's Clean Heat Standard potential study. They included some results with these calculations related to using the average number of weatherization projects that can be completed annually by each contractor as a proxy for workforce. So that would be our suggestion as a starting point.
Yeah, I saw that, Emily, and I appreciated that. And I guess I'm just trying to scratch a little bit further and find out if you have some of the information that you alluded to, or how we should go about getting that information.
Yeah, we can follow up with some more information about workforce capacity as it relates to programs and what projects can be completed currently.
Good. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
And there's another dynamic that you guys, that Efficiency Vermont referred to, and that was essentially the consumer experience kind of constraints. That is, adoption is slow just by essentially either word of mouth or the really the kind of adoption curve that is and that we face. And my question is, if you have adoption curves or some framework for that would allow us to kind of incorporate the consumer constraints that you're alluding to into our modeling.
I don't have an answer for that prepared currently, but that can be part of our follow-up, and I appreciate the question.
Okay. So I think that covers most of my questions. I think several of the comments really provided fairly robust responses, and I don't need to kind of repeat essentially what has been said, but I really appreciated all the comments that have been provided, and I really appreciate all the effort that went into providing the level of detail. I do expect to have to kind of follow up and reach out to Efficiency Vermont and maybe Vermont Gas and perhaps Jared with respect to kind of his experience in Oregon and those sorts of things to see if we can somehow fold in some of the concerns. I am expecting that we'll have one more workshop, and I think to the extent that we do, it will probably be focused on kind of scenarios and outputs. And also, I believe that Ken Jones provided a number of comments that I'm still kind of processing in my mind, trying to figure out if there's a way to incorporate or to incorporate in the work that we're doing. But I appreciate everyone's participation. If anyone has any other closing thoughts or comments, feel free to raise your hand and make those comments now. Otherwise, I'll try to adjourn the session. Okay, seeing none, thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Commissioner Allen.
Thanks, everybody.